Good morning. So yes, today is the last installment on the sermon series Towards a Community of Grace for now. And I too am sad to see it end. It has been really fun and interesting to think about and talk about the different ways that moving more towards being a community of grace, it would change us as individuals, our congregation, our neighborhood, and who knows, maybe the world. It's fun, and I could keep going on different topics for a long time, but we do need to move on. Next week, we have Clive Rainey coming to talk to us from Habitat for Humanity, and then we'll begin our stewardship emphasis, which is go and do the same. It's fabulous and wonderful. So this sermon series is ending, but some really cool stuff is coming. And more sermons will be coming on this in the spring as well. But what's nice to remember is, as Dell pointed out, it's not a sermon series. It's a ministry focus. It's a direction that we're heading to as ministers, and we hope as a congregation. Well, we've heard it said, as we've been talking about this, that every congregation, flowers behind me, is a community of grace. Which is true to a point. We all have our margins. We all have our people who we don't feel really comfortable around. People who we're not sure we want to let in and be part of us. Well, this morning I'm going to talk about a group of people that have been on the margins since the beginning. Immigrants and refugees. Now I know this is a hot topic right now, and so believe me, let me make myself clear, this is not a political sermon. I am not up here to talk politics. But let's be honest. There is not one of us sitting here in this room who is not a descendant of immigrants. Migration is a part of human history. It's a part of our individual story. It's a part of our nation story. And it's a part of the faith story. When we look at Genesis and Exodus, we see the beginning stories of migration. Right at the beginning, Adam and Eve, Noah and his family, Abram and Sarai, Lot and his family, Joseph, Jacob, Moses, the Israelites. We begin with migration. Life continues with migration. They're the story of God's people. And these stories are stories that people who are immigrating relate to today. Remember, Adam and Eve were forcibly ejected for their own good. Noah and his family, natural disaster. Abram and Sarai, well, they were looking for that better life somewhere else that God had promised them would be there. Lot and his family were fleeing from a corrupt country. Joseph is forcibly taken to a new country. Jacob moves his family due to famine, and to be near family that's doing better. And Moses and the Israelites are fleeing oppression. From the beginning of time, the reasons for migration have been the same. They're the same today. So I want you to take a minute, and I want you to think about your own family's history. Think about the immigration story that is a part of your family's story. Why did your ancestors come to the United States? So why am I asking you to reflect on that as we begin? Well, because that's what God did to the Israelites. God told the Israelites to remember their immigration past as they were navigating how to deal with the immigrants who were among them. In Exodus 22, "You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt." And in Leviticus 19, "When an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." And in Deuteronomy, For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who is not partial and takes no bribe, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and who loves the strangers, providing them with food and clothing. You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. See, the Israelites needed to be reminded of their immigrant past to really fully hear how God was telling them they needed to treat the immigrants among them. And maybe we need that same reminder. Maybe we need to remember our migration, immigrant past, to hear what God tells us in treating of immigrants. Exodus. Wait, let me shift. Wrong ones. Deuteronomy 14. Every third year you shall bring out the full tithe of your produce for that year, and store it within your towns. The Levites, because they have no allotment or inheritance with you, as well as the resident aliens, the orphans and the widows in your town, may come and eat their fill, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work that you undertake. Psalm 146. The Lord watches over the strangers. He upholds the orphans and the widow. By the way of the wicked, he brings to ruin. Isaiah 16. Let the outcasts of Moab settle among you. Be a refuge to them from the destroyer. And Ezekiel 47. So you shall divide this land among you according to the tribes of Israel. You shall allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and for the aliens who reside among you and have begotten children among you. They shall be to you as citizens of Israel. With you, they shall be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. I could go on and on. I could stand up here for probably 20 minutes reading those scriptures. But alien, stranger, refugees. To us today, they have different meanings. We have different feelings about each of those words. But in Hebrew, they're all the same word. The word is gar, G-E-R. And it just simply means someone who has temporarily taken up residence somewhere. And throughout the Old Testament, regardless of its nature, people are called to care for the ger, no matter what. And it's not just the Old Testament, it goes forward into the New Testament. There are 3 words in Greek that are used to talk about people who have come from somewhere else. Xenos, perikos, and my tongue trips on this one every time, sorry. Parametermos. Parapedimos. It should be up there. Sorry, ancient Greek isn't spoken anymore. But it's used throughout the New Testament to talk about immigrants, to talk about strangers. We all know Matthew 25. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And from Hebrews 13, "Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it." Care of immigrant, refugee, stranger among us is throughout the entire scriptures. And let's not forget Jesus' beginning. Maybe that's part of it, because Jesus' ministry always called people to look at the edges and the margins and see the humanity and care for those on the margins. Because remember, Jesus started his life as a refugee. Matthew 2. "For after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.' Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt." Now we know that Jesus and his family remained in Egypt for a while. So obviously they were taken in and cared for. And I find myself wondering about that community in Egypt that took them in. What did they think of the reason why Joseph and Mary and Jesus were there? Did they think they had a valid reason to be the immigrant among them? Did they think that they were fearful of Herod, that was valid? Was Herod really that scary and oppressive? Did they question? Or did they simply do as God had called them to do? To welcome in the immigrant among them and care for them. I also find myself pulling that forward into our world today, and what does it mean to care for the immigrant among us? As people of faith, what does that look like? Well, I know one example, and it's my favorite one. It's from 1989. Some of you may remember the sanctuary movement. John Fife was a Presbyterian minister in a very small congregation in Tucson, Arizona. Okay, I have to start this by saying that I've met John Fife, and he's like one of my rock star idols. Not biased at all. So, this very small church looked around their neighborhood and thought they needed to do something. So they were reaching out into the community and doing different things, and in John Fife's words, it was like overnight the population of the neighborhood doubled, and they didn't know why. Now, it was a highly Chicano neighborhood, and there were suddenly people everywhere. People on the streets, there were people, and it just seemed to be multiplying every single day, and so they decided to find out why. And they learned that all of these newcomers were immigrants. They were fleeing civil war in Central America. So the church said, well, God tells us to care for the immigrant among us, and so they opened their doors and they welcomed the immigrant in, giving them food, shelter, clothing, and jobs. Well, this actually took off and spread a little bit, and throughout Tucson and a little bit beyond, there became the Central American Refugee Underground Railroad. Well, now those of you that remember that movement know it was underground because there was a little bit of a political component to this. The people who were fleeing Central America were fleeing quickly out of fear. And they were coming across the borders without proper paperwork. We might call them illegals. But the US government did not acknowledge their reason for fleeing. They did not see them as refugees and would not grant them an amnesty status. But the church said, that's not what we're supposed to be worried about. God tells us to care for the immigrant among us, and so we will. And the movement spread, and John Fife, along with 15 others, were arrested, and they were charged with transporting, concealing, harboring, and shielding undocumented immigrants. Now, this was a federal trial, and it got a lot of publicity. I'm not sure the publicity did what the government, the law was intending, which was sort of to shut the whole thing down, because instead it spread, and so it went beyond even what John Fife and the founders thought it ever would. Other churches, companies, cities, colleges, universities, and even a state or two declared themselves places of sanctuary. And so refugees continued to find shelter until the US government did decide that these were refugees and not just people crossing the border illegally, and they granted them amnesty. A nationwide movement of caring for the immigrant among them started from a small church following that call that God gave them. You know, people are still leaving Central America and fleeing for a variety of reasons, some of which the US government still does not acknowledge are valid for refugee status. And it's not just from Central America. People all over the world are fleeing their homes, fleeing their countries of origin. The highest numbers of refugees right now are coming out of Syria, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Are they recognized? How are we welcoming them? Because once people flee for whatever reason, when they come here, we decide. We're the ones who choose whether or not they're welcomed. And we do choose, because some immigrants we welcome in and we give jobs and we say, we're so glad you're here. while others we turn our back on, we push away. So why is that? Why do we welcome some and push away others? See, I think it comes down to fear. Fear of what the immigrant is going to do to us, to our lives, to our culture. We're scared. And you know what? I'll bet that the Israelites, when they were trying to figure out what to do, they had left oppressive places and they had created their communities, and I am betting that they were scared of those immigrants and newcomers among them, just as we are today. But you know, God didn't say, all right, Israelites, I know you're scared of that person, so don't let them in. God said, remember who you were. Remember how you were treated. God calls us out of fear and into love. God calls us to care. And I wonder what it would look like if, as church, we stepped out of fear. What would happen if we didn't worry about the nationalities and the boundaries and just took care of the immigrants and strangers among us? Pray with me. God, we are so grateful that you sent Jesus to this world to call us to look beyond ourselves. Help us remember that Jesus started his life as a refugee, and he needed people to care for him and his family. Remind us that we too were immigrants once. Help us see the people that we meet on the street as your children, regardless of why they're here or who they are. In Christ's name, amen.